I met Anthony when we were both 28 at this skate park, where his daughter Maya was showing off these incredible tricks on her board. Even with her bone condition, that girl was fearless. Landing jumps that would terrify most kids her age. Anthony was cheering her on with this proud dad energy that honestly made my heart skip a beat. Here was a man who actually cared about his child, who showed up and paid attention. I was immediately drawn to that protective, devoted father thing he had going on. Of course. That's when Lauren showed up and ruined everything. His baby mama came storming over like she owned the place, going off about custody schedules and how Anthony was confusing Maya by bringing random women around. Random women? I'd been talking to the man for maybe 20 minutes, but Lauren was acting like I was trying to steal her family or something. The woman was completely unhinged, getting in my face about who I was and what I wanted with her Anthony. Her Anthony, they were never even married, just some hookup that resulted in Maya. But Lauren acted like she had some kind of claim on him. Anthony handled it pretty well, telling Lauren to calm down and that Maya's skating time wasn't going to be ruined by adult drama. But I could see how exhausted he was by her behavior, how this was probably a regular occurrence. Right then and there, I decided this man needed someone stable in his life, someone who could be a positive influence instead of whatever toxic situation Lauren was creating. I gave Anthony my number before leaving, and when he texted me that same evening apologizing for Lauren's behavior, I knew I wanted to be the woman who rescued him from all that chaos. Dating Anthony for the next year and a half was like being in a relationship with two people. Him and Lauren's constant interference. The woman tracked his every move, calling during our dates to demand updates about Maya, showing up at restaurants where we were eating because she happened to be in the area. She had this sick need to insert herself into every moment of Anthony's life. And honestly, it was pathetic. Here I was, trying to build something real and mature with this man, and Lauren was acting like a jealous teenager who couldn't accept that Anthony had moved on. But I handled it with grace and patience because I could see what Anthony needed. He needed a woman who wouldn't create drama, who could rise above Lauren's petty games and show him what a healthy relationship actually looked like. Every time Lauren called screaming about some imaginary custody violation, I stayed calm and supportive. When she showed up at Anthony's apartment demanding to search for signs of me influencing Maya, I suggested Anthony and I go out so Lauren could have her little tantrum in private. I was everything Lauren wasn't: mature, stable, and focused on Anthony's happiness instead of my own insecurities. When Anthony proposed after 18 months together, I felt completely vindicated. He chose me over Lauren's chaos, me over her constant manipulation and control games. We planned this beautiful wedding, and I insisted we invite Lauren because I wanted to show her exactly what class looked like. I wanted her to see Anthony marrying a woman who actually deserved him, someone who brought peace to his life instead of constant drama. Lauren showed up to our wedding and cried through the entire ceremony. Actually cried? Like she was at a funeral instead of a celebration. Part of me felt sorry for her because it must have been devastating to watch the man she'd been obsessing over for years marry someone else. But mostly, I felt triumphant. Those tears proved everything I'd known all along, that Lauren had never gotten over Anthony, that all her custody drama and interference had been about keeping him tied to her, and that my presence in his life had finally forced her to face reality. Anthony was mine now, legally and completely, and Lauren's tears were just confirmation that I'd won. The first couple years of marriage were exactly what I'd expected. Anthony was devoted and loving. Maya accepted me as a positive influence in her life, and even Lauren seemed to back off a bit, now that the legal reality of our marriage made her manipulation tactics less effective. We were building this stable, mature life together, and I felt proud of what we'd created. Anthony had a wife who supported his career, who got along with his daughter, and who didn't create the constant chaos Lauren had brought to his world. But then we found out I couldn't have children, and everything started falling apart. 2 years into our marriage, after months of trying and testing, the doctor confirmed that pregnancy wasn't going to happen for us. Anthony was incredibly supportive, saying he already had Maya, and that being childless wouldn't change how he felt about our marriage. He kept insisting that I was enough, that our life together was complete without adding more children to the mix. The problem was, I didn't feel complete. I felt broken and defective, like my body had betrayed not just me, but our entire future. Anthony had his daughter, this amazing kid, who was already becoming a successful YouTuber and making something of herself despite her bone condition. But I had nothing, no legacy, no proof that I'd contributed anything meaningful to the world. Anthony could say it didn't matter all he wanted, but I knew he was just being polite. What man doesn't want children with his wife? What husband doesn't secretly wish his wife could give him what some random hookup like Lauren had managed to provide? I started going to therapy to deal with the depression that came with accepting my infertility. But honestly, talking about it just made everything worse. The therapist kept pushing me to process my grief and find other sources of fulfillment. But what she didn't understand was that this wasn't just about having babies. This was about feeling like a complete failure as a woman. Like I'd somehow tricked Anthony into marrying damaged goods. Lauren might have been crazy and manipulative, but at least she'd given Anthony a child. At least she'd proven she could do the one thing wives are supposed to do. By the time I hit my late 30s, I was drowning in this feeling that my life had become completely meaningless. Anthony went to work, came home, watched TV, and acted like everything was fine. Maya was thriving with her YouTube channel and didn't need much from either of us anymore. Our house felt like a museum of a life that had never really started, and Anthony seemed perfectly content with that. He'd always been a simple guy with simple needs, but I was realizing that simple wasn't enough for me anymore. I needed something that made me feel alive and valuable, something that reminded me I was still a desirable woman, with something to offer. That's when I joined the softball team and met Angel. He was this energetic, charismatic coach who made everyone feel special and important. The team was full of women my age who were all dealing with their own midlife stuff, empty nests, boring marriages, careers that had plateaued. Angel had this way of making us feel like athletes, like we were capable of more than we'd given ourselves credit for. He was encouraging and physical in his coaching style, always giving high fives and congratulatory pats when we made good plays. For the first time in years, I felt like I was part of something exciting and dynamic. Anthony started coming to my games, which was sweet at first, but quickly became embarrassing. He'd sit in the stands with this confused look on his face, like he couldn't understand why grown women were taking recreational softball so seriously. When Angel would give us pep talks or celebrate our victories with hugs and playful touches, Anthony would get this weird, judgmental expression that made me cringe. The other women on the team started making comments about my watchdog husband and how unusual it was for someone to bring their spouse to every single game. The breaking point came when Angel was congratulating our team after a particularly good inning, giving everyone these quick, supportive pats on the back as we headed to the dugout. It's completely normal coach behavior. Anyone who's ever played sports knows that physical encouragement is just part of team dynamics. But Anthony chose that moment to make a scene, calling out, "Hey dude, watch your hands," like Angel was some kind of predator instead of a professional coach, trying to motivate his team. I was mortified. The entire team heard Anthony's comment, and the look on Angel's face was a mixture of confusion and embarrassment. Here was this man who volunteered his time to coach a bunch of middle-aged women for free, and my husband was treating him like a criminal for doing standard coaching activities. I wanted to disappear into the ground. After the game, I had to explain to Anthony that his behavior was completely inappropriate and that he was embarrassing both of us with his paranoid suspicions. That's when I told Anthony he needed to stop coming to my games. I explained that he was making everyone uncomfortable with his weird possessiveness, and that Angel was obviously not a threat to anyone. The man was married to another guy. For crying out loud, Anthony got all hurt and confused, acting like I was choosing softball over our marriage. But that wasn't what this was about. This was about me finally having something that was mine, something that made me feel capable and valued. And I wasn't going to let Anthony's insecurities ruin that for me. With Anthony no longer hovering over every game, I could finally relax and enjoy being part of the team. Angel and I started talking more, and I realized we had this incredible connection. He understood what it felt like to be underestimated and overlooked, and he saw potential in me that Anthony had never bothered to notice. Angel made me feel like I was interesting and attractive, like I had qualities worth celebrating. When he started texting me between games with encouragement and jokes, I felt more alive than I had in years. I know how this probably sounds, but Angel and I connecting wasn't some sordid affair. It was two adults finding comfort and understanding in each other during difficult periods in our lives. I was dealing with the depression and emptiness of my childless marriage, and Angel was struggling with feeling unappreciated in his own relationship. We were both committed to other people, but that didn't mean we couldn't recognize what we meant to each other. The physical side of things developed naturally from our emotional connection. Angel made me feel beautiful and desired in ways that Anthony hadn't in years. When Angel told me I was amazing, I believed him because he'd seen me at my best during games, cheering me on and celebrating my successes. When he said I deserve better than a husband who took me for granted, it felt like someone was finally seeing the truth about my situation. Our conversations became more intimate, and I found myself sharing things with Angel that I'd never been able to discuss with Anthony, like how boring my marriage had become, how Anthony seemed perfectly content with our mundane routine while I was dying inside from the lack of passion and excitement. Angel understood because he was dealing with similar issues in his own marriage. We were both married to people who didn't really see us, who took our presence for granted without appreciating what they had. When Angel and I finally became physical, it felt like coming back to life after years of sleepwalking. He was passionate and adventurous in ways that Anthony had never been, making me feel like a desirable woman instead of just a convenient wife. I'm not proud of the affair, but I'm not going to pretend it didn't fill a void that Anthony had left empty for years. Angel made me remember who I was before I became just another piece of furniture in Anthony's predictable life. I started telling Angel about my frustrations with Anthony, how he'd never been spontaneous or exciting, how our sex life had become routine and boring, how he seemed more interested in Maya's YouTube success than in making his wife feel special. Angel was sympathetic and understanding, pointing out that maybe Anthony was the problem, not me. Maybe I wasn't broken or defective. Maybe I was just married to someone who didn't know how to appreciate what he had. Looking back, I can see that I was going through a classic midlife crisis. But at the time, it felt like I was finally waking up from a decade of settling for less than I deserved. I loved Anthony in a comfortable, familiar way, but I wasn't in love with him anymore. He felt more like a roommate than a husband, someone I shared expenses and household duties with, but who didn't really see me as a complete person. Angel saw me as a whole woman with needs and desires that deserved to be fulfilled. The relationship with Angel became more intense over the following months. We'd text constantly, sharing jokes and observations that Anthony would never understand. Angel had this way of making even ordinary things seem exciting and fun. When he suggested we make a video together during one of our encounters, it felt spontaneous and playful, rather than something I should be ashamed of. Anthony had never shown that kind of adventurous interest in our physical relationship, and Angel's enthusiasm made me feel like I was worth taking risks for. I thought I was being careful about hiding the relationship from Anthony, but apparently I wasn't careful enough. One day I came home to find Anthony sitting at the kitchen table with my phone in his hands, looking like someone had died. He'd gone through my messages and found everything. The texts, the photos, even the video Angel and I had made. The look on his face was a mixture of devastation and disgust that made me feel defensive rather than guilty. Anthony didn't yell or throw things like I expected him to. Instead, he just sat there asking quiet questions about how long it had been going on and whether I'd ever intended to tell him. His calm reaction was almost worse than anger would have been, because it made me feel like the unreasonable one for getting caught up in something that had made me happy. I tried to explain that this wasn't about hurting him, that it was about me finding something that had been missing from our marriage. But Anthony wasn't interested in understanding my perspective. Within days, Anthony had filed for divorce and contacted the softball league about Angel's behavior. I couldn't believe he was going to destroy Angel's reputation over what was essentially a private matter between consenting adults. Angel lost his coaching position immediately, and the story even made it onto the local Saturday morning news as a brief human interest piece about inappropriate conduct in recreational sports. Angel wrote this dramatic apology letter full of religious language about redemption and forgiveness, which honestly seemed like overkill for the situation. The worst part was that Angel's husband Marcus decided to stay with him and work through their problems, while Anthony was determined to throw away 10 years of marriage over one mistake. It showed me exactly what kind of man Anthony really was. Someone who would rather destroy everything than fight for what we'd built together. Angel and Marcus were committed to their relationship in a way that Anthony apparently wasn't committed to ours. I spent the divorce proceedings trying to make Anthony understand that people make mistakes, that marriages go through difficult periods, and that this didn't have to be the end of our story. I offered him a free pass to have his own affair, if that would make things even between us. I reminded him of everything the good we'd shared, of how stable and happy our life had been before this rough patch. I was willing to do whatever it took to rebuild trust and move forward together. But Anthony was completely inflexible. He'd made up his mind that I'd betrayed him and destroyed our marriage, and nothing I said could convince him to take a more mature perspective on the situation. During our final court hearing, I told him that this divorce wouldn't stop me from trying to regain his trust, that I'd proved to him we were meant to be together. Anthony just looked at me like I was speaking a foreign language. After the divorce was finalized, I gave Anthony some space to cool down and realize what he'd lost. I figured once the initial hurt wore off, he'd start missing what we'd had together and be open to reconciliation. But months went by without any contact, and I started to worry that Anthony was so stubborn he'd rather be alone than admit he'd made a mistake in divorcing me. That's when I decided to find out where Anthony was living and check on him. It took some detective work, but I eventually tracked down his new apartment complex. I wasn't stalking him. I was just concerned about the man I'd spent 10 years of my life with and wanted to make sure he was taking care of himself. When I saw some woman coming and going from his place, I realized Anthony was already seeing someone new, which proved that his claims about being too hurt to trust anyone had been complete nonsense. Anthony got a restraining order against me, which was a ridiculous overreaction to me simply checking on his well-being. The legal system treated me like some kind of dangerous criminal instead of a concerned ex-wife who wanted to make sure Anthony was making good decisions. I tried to maintain contact through fake social media profiles because I knew Anthony needed someone looking out for him, especially if he was already getting involved with random women who didn't know him like I did. The situation escalated when I realized Anthony was serious about this new relationship and wasn't just using this Jessica person as a rebound. I could see them together on his balcony sometimes, and it was obvious that she was temporary and shallow compared to what Anthony and I had shared. Jessica was pretty enough, but she didn't understand Anthony's history or what he really needed in a partner. She was just some distraction keeping Anthony from dealing with the real issues in his life. I had decided I needed to talk to Anthony face to face, to make him understand what he was throwing away by choosing some random woman over the wife who'd spent a decade building a life with him. I knew he wouldn't answer his door if I knocked, so I thought I could reach his balcony from the side of the building and surprise him with a conversation he couldn't avoid. Climbing up to Anthony's balcony seemed reasonable at the time, but the building maintenance wasn't as sturdy as I'd expected. I lost my grip and fell, landing hard on my knees and face. The pain was incredible, and I called out for Anthony to help me, though in my confusion, I think I called him Daniel, which was the name of my ex-boyfriend from college. Anthony and Jessica came outside to see what was happening, but instead of helping me, Anthony just called an ambulance and the police. I ended up in the hospital with injuries to my knees and face, and the police wanted to press charges for violating the restraining order and attempted breaking and entering. The whole situation was blown completely out of proportion. I just wanted to have a conversation with my ex-husband, and suddenly I was being treated like some kind of violent criminal. Anthony refused to visit me in the hospital or drop the charges, proving once again that he was more interested in punishing me than in showing any compassion for someone he'd supposedly loved. After I was released from the hospital, I found out that Anthony had moved to a different apartment and that Jessica had relocated to Toronto, probably because she couldn't handle the reality of Anthony's complicated situation. Anthony had managed to completely cut off all contact between us, and there was no way for me to reach him or explain my side of things. The man I'd spent 10 years of my life with had essentially disappeared rather than deal with the aftermath of his own decisions. Looking back now, I can see that Anthony chose the easy path of running away instead of doing the hard work of rebuilding our relationship. He'd rather start over with strangers than fight for what we'd created together. Lauren never did get married, probably because she spent so many years obsessing over Anthony that she never learned how to have a healthy relationship with anyone else. Angel and Marcus worked through their problems and stayed together, proving that committed couples can overcome infidelity when both people are willing to try. Anthony decided to stay single rather than risk getting hurt again, which honestly seems like a waste of his life. He's chosen loneliness and isolation over the possibility of real love, and I feel sorry for him. Maya's YouTube career took off, and she's doing well in Phoenix, but Anthony's missing out on finding someone who could make him truly happy. Jessica moved on to Toronto and probably found someone more emotionally available than Anthony turned out to be. I made mistakes during our marriage, but I was dealing with depression and infertility and a husband who'd stopped seeing me as anything more than a convenient companion. The affair with Angel was wrong, but it was also a symptom of larger problems in our relationship that Anthony refused to address. Instead of working together to fix what was broken between us, Anthony chose to throw everything away and start over with people who didn't know him the way I did. The whole experience taught me that some people aren't capable of the kind of forgiveness and commitment that real marriage requires. Anthony wanted a perfect wife who never made mistakes or had needs that inconvenienced him, when I proved to be human instead of the ideal woman he'd imagined. He decided it was easier to replace me than to do the work of understanding what had gone wrong between us. That's his loss, not mine.